It's actually
Yeah, what do you mean?
well, I don't know. We have the vegetable garage sales for the many years. It's a one. But in the theater, so.
They're not here, we're not gonna read it. I'll pass. We have to do it now. Each telephone period is position.
Nobody
gets hurt.
That's another thing.
They hurt, so that's it.
Be part of the right.
I would like to call the July 10th, 2024 City Council regular meeting to order. Will everyone please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Carrie,
Yes.
Chilson,
Present.
Hutchings. Here. Nelson,
Present.
Parker,
Yes, I'm here.
Wackler. Present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda and consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda and consent agenda? Mr. Carey.
So moved.
Thank you. May I have a second? Thank you, Ms. Hutchings. Are there any changes to the agenda or consent agenda? Seeing none, would the clerk please read the consent agenda? What about mine?
June 26, 2024 council meeting minutes, ordinance 2024-026, amending Soldotna Municipal Code 2.22, access to public records. Sponsored by the city clerk, public hearing on July 24th. Resolution 2024-020, commending the Soldotna High School boys soccer team as the division state champions for the year 2024, sponsored by Vice Mayor Parker. Resolution 2024-021, reallocating funds for investment purposes amongst the short-term, medium-term, and long-term accounts, sponsored by the city manager. Resolution 2024-022, adopting joint resolution number 2024-001, a joint resolution from the Kenai Peninsula Borough and the cities of Homer, Kachemak, Kenai, Seward, Seldovia, and Soldotna, supporting the city of Kenai's submission of a small community air service development program grant proposal to support incentives aimed at direct air services from the Kenai Municipal Airport to Seattle, Tacoma, and the lower 48, sponsored by the city manager. Action Memorandum 2024-010, confirming the recommendation of Paul Whitney to the Kenai Peninsula Borough Planning Commission, term to end July 31st, 2027. That is your consent agenda.
Are there any public comment on any of the items just read by the clerk? And for those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you'd like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone wishing to speak on any item just read by the clerk, please step forward, state your name and address for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Is this on? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Terry Eubank. I'm the city manager with the city of Kenai. So Mayor Whitney, council members and staff, my name is Terry Eubank, the city manager of the city of Kenai. I'm here today to recommend the adoption of resolution 2024-022 in support of Kenai's Small Community Air Service Development Grant Proposal, also known as a SCADSB grant. For residents of the Kenai Peninsula, establishing direct flight service from Kenai to Seattle, Tacoma promises significant benefits for our community. It will shorten travel times, offer an alternative to the long drive to Anchorage. It should reduce travel costs, especially for families, and stimulate economic growth. To achieve this goal, we must present a compelling case to potential air carriers. The first step was to commission a leakage study to analyze the air service market. The results were presented to the Kenai City Council on June 19th and provided some key data points. 896 people a day travel to and from the Kenai catchment area, which was defined conservatively and did not include the cities of Seward, Homer, Seldovia, or Kachemak City. Of these, 829 of those are driving to and from Anchorage to fly or return from their ultimate destination in the lower 48 or beyond. Kenai passengers pay far above the national average, paying an average of $729 one way compared to $394 one way for an Anchorage resident. far above the national average of $185. The top destination was identified as Seattle-Tacoma, with 69 passengers per day leaving and returning to the Kenai catchment area. There are definitely industry challenges. They include a nationwide pilot shortage. By 2026, they estimate the airline industry will be 24,000 pilots short. They estimate there'll be 700 jets parked in the desert because they don't have people to fly them. So even with these headwinds, we do think this report showed a significant potential for this new route and growth in the Kenai Air Service market. So with the supporting data, the next step is just to attract an air carrier. That's where the SCADSB grant comes into play. SCADSB is a program to financially assist small communities to enhance their air service. Notably, SCADSB grant funds do not come from federal income taxes. Instead, they are sourced from the Airport and Airway Trust Fund, which collects over $11 billion annually from various aviation-related taxes and surcharges. If awarded the SCADSB grant, the city plans to use the funds for air carrier recruitment to attract air carriers to establish direct Kenai to Seattle-Tacoma route, promotion of the Kenai Municipal Airport as a destination for these direct flights, and to offer a revenue guarantee to airlines ensuring the route's financial viability. If ticket sales meet the minimum revenue per flight, no guarantee would be paid. Establishing direct air service from Kenai to the lower 48 states will provide more efficient travel option for our residents, alleviate congestion on the Seward and Sterling highways, make air travel more affordable for our community, and boost the local economy through increased connectivity. I respectfully request your support for Resolution 2024-022, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions or comments from the council? Mr. Chilson.
Thank you, Terry, for coming out tonight to comment for this. I just want to say that I am very excited to see the city of Kenai working on this and fully support this joint resolution. Selfishly myself, I stand to benefit from it, but more importantly than I think not only the city of Kenai, but all of the community throughout the peninsula, I think stands to benefit from this and the economic boost that could bring. My question is there anything else we can be doing to help you in your endeavor to pursue this? Because I'm all about doing anything we can to help make this a possibility here.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Chilson through Mayor Whitney. I think at this time, no, I think this grant, the grant application is due on the 25th of this month. It'll be about a 90-day award period. During that period, we're continuing to work with our consultant from Valair. This is what companies like, there's only 2 or 3 in the nation like Valair do. So we're really leaning pretty heavily on them. But rest assured, we cast a pretty wide net with this joint resolution. We've reached out to every chamber on the peninsula. I met with the Kenaitze the Kenaitze Indian Tribe this morning and asked them for a letter of support as well. So if there is anything that comes up, we won't be shy, because I agree with you. I think this is much bigger than the city of Kenai. This is for the entire peninsula community.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Carey.
Good to see you, sir. Would you envision that this could, long-term wise, be a springboard toward actually international flights, even to Asia?
I think anything could happen, honestly. I mean, like I said, Seattle-Tacoma was definitely the #1 destination with almost 70 people a day to and from. So we feel really solid about that start, and let's see where this goes. I know Anchorage International has capacity issues. And so as the population on the peninsula grows, I think, yeah, the sky's the limit for it.
Sky's the limit. Good job. Excellent, because success breeds success. Thank you for doing this.
Anything else from the council? Saying none, thank you very much.
Thank you
for the presentation. Anyone else in the chambers wishing to speak on any item read under the consent agenda? Seeing none, take a look at Zoom, and I see no hands raised there. Are there any, having no one else wishing to speak, the approval of the agenda and consent agenda is back before the council. Any objections to approving the agenda and consent agenda? Seeing none and hearing none, the agenda and consent agenda are approved. We'll move on to the next item is presentation with prior notice, and that'll be Diane Blummer of Blummer and Associates Legislative Update. And good evening.
Good evening. my presentation isn't very long tonight, so hopefully you'll appreciate that, but I do have a few handouts, if you're interested afterwards, on the vetoes from the governor. Good evening, Mayor and City Council members, City Manager. Is that too close? Is that too loud, you guys?
Yeah.
I just want to do a legislative wrap-up quickly and then answer some questions that you may have based on this year's, the end of the 33rd legislature. The 2024 legislative session ended with the Senate wrapping up just shortly before midnight. The House went a little longer. They did end up passing the budgets in a timely manner. The state budget was settled with an operating budget of approximately $6 billion. And the in-state funds and capital budget about $4 billion in state and federal funds. That's before it went to the governor for his approval. There was a total of 62 bills passed. 40 of them were passed that last day of session, which resulted then in a lot of frustration because there was a lot of what they call Christmas treeing or pickup trucking, where they took other bills and stuffed them into bills. And so it was really difficult to follow what was happening that last day. Even for me, who's in the room and observing closely, it was hard to follow. So anybody in the public, it was extremely difficult. You didn't know. All of the bills are supposed to be a single subject if they go into another bill, but that didn't necessarily happen this year, in my opinion. Some people may disagree with that. So in addition to the budget, the House of Representatives passed 5 bills after midnight that are all in question at this point. There's a few things that the Constitution sets the regular session at 120 days, and then on 121st timeframe, it's a constitutional limit. So those 5 bills could be contested. If there's a couple things that could happen. The speaker could not transmit those bills to the governor and just let them sit. The bills could be transmitted to the governor and the governor could sign them or veto them. The bills could be transferred to the governor and he could not sign them, allowing them to become law without his signature. It's anybody's guess right now what's going to happen. There are a few bills that are of concern. I'll list the 5 bills and then maybe talk about one. HB 29 prevented insurance companies from discriminating against elected officials. And if you want more information on any of these bills afterwards, I'm happy to get that for you. I just didn't want to go into a lengthy detail on stuff that was not of interest. HB 189 allows certain people under 21 to serve alcohol. So in certain circumstances, if you were 19 at the fair or some of the other places, you could actually serve in a supervised area alcohol because of the workforce shortage that we're having right now. That was one of the bills. And that was kind of a big deal for I think some of the cruise line agency, like Denali Park area, some of those places are really struggling to find workers 21 and over. HB 122 was a bill that allowed the Alaska Railroad to issue revenue bonds to pay for the dock maintenance in Seward. And that one's probably one of the ones that is really being looked at closely. The cruise line agency is very concerned if the dock maintenance is not done. But there's also huge room for contention with that bill as well. So we'll have to see how that plays out. HB 203 was dealing with electronic payroll for businesses. So you could actually, instead of a direct deposit, you could put someone's paycheck onto a card. And I don't know why, I don't know all the details surrounding that, but for some reason it was a really big deal to some legislators to get that one passed. And then also a bill about HB 19, a bill about commercial vessel registrations. So all 5 of those bills are still sitting, waiting while they're trying to decide what they want to do with those bills and if people will be contesting if they move them forward. And I think too, it's a slippery slope for setting precedent in the future. So that's another concern I think that they have. So then the operating and the capital budget were passed from the legislature to the governor on June 10th. On the 28th, the governor signed the capital operating and mental health budget. He line item vetoed all 3 budgets in some form or fashion, reducing the total spend by $232 million, $203 million from the state unrestricted general funds. And then the enacted UGF budget is about $6.3 billion now. It's a small increase from the FY24 and I have a little handout that I can give to you guys after a bit. So overall totals, operating budget, 12.2 billion, all funds. That includes UGF, and I'm using acronyms, I'm sorry. Undesignated general funds, designated general funds, federal and other. So it's all in. And then the capital budget with the state or with the state component funds and the federal funds would be $3.5 billion. The vetoes, so the governor made some of the vetoes. 105.7 million, 105.7 million from the operating and 126.3 million from the capital budget. You'll see on this document that there's a column, the governor's by constitution is to provide an explicit reason for vetoing, for budget vetoes. Most all of these say preserved general funds for fiscal stability. So there wasn't, it was hard to determine if what the rhyme or reason was for those particular vetoes. So anyway, I don't know if there's questions now or you want me to just keep going through the presentation. I'm going to start talking about some of the highs and lows of the budget. So does anybody have anything before I go into that? No.
Anything from the council? Keep going.
Okay, so for historical context, the governor's first budget in FY 2020 was about 5.5 billion. And that was signed into law after several special sessions. This FY 2025 budget is about 835 million more, so about a 15% increase. And it has about $150 million surplus right now, the way that it's written. The permanent fund dividends this fall will be approximately $1,718 per resident. That's the governor's office projection. The projection by the legislature was about $1,655. So as you all know, it all depends, but that's about the range that it'll be coming out at. The operating budget, some of the highlights that happened, 174.6 million for the student-based allocation, which was about 680 per student. So the current student-based allocation is about 5,960. It's about $280 over what it was in 2014. So that's why there was so much conversation about school funding this year, I think. 7.3 million for pupil transportation increase, 62.8 million for school major maintenance, relocation, renovations, and replacements, which I think everybody knows that is needed across the state. And then there was 87.5 million for the University of Alaska operations and deferred maintenance as well. There was education, energy, and finances were kind of the big topics. Finances always being the PFD, but energy was a big deal, and you all know that from living down here on the peninsula, that the Cook Inlet was getting a lot of attention. 23 million, this is under the energy component, but this doesn't have to do with the Cook Inlet. For the Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, energy research and energy weatherization. There was 10.5 for the Renewable Energy Grant Fund, and then 11 to the University of Alaska for the rail belt carbon capture and sequestration project that we'll talk a little bit more. That was one of the bills that passed this year. There was some money put in for public safety, mostly in the VPSO program, and then some patrol vessels for Southeast Alaska. There was 53.2 million put into the Alaska Housing Finance for, it was programs for home buyers, owners, and renters to provide safe and affordable housing. Housing, childcare, and workforce development are also key issues key talking points throughout the session. So that was kind of some of the highlights of the budget. Some of the vetoes that were made by the governor this year were discretionary direct projects. There was a few statewide projects, but it was more like direct projects that impacted communities individually. He held true on his promise to keep the student-based allocation that we just talked about. He did veto 11.9 million that was intended to bring the state in compliance with the federal funding that was accepted during the COVID program. And so there's still some question about that out there. He vetoed 110 $1,000 for the disposal of abandoned vehicles, which I think probably impacts communities across the state. 1.2 million was vetoed from public broadcasting and rural radio stations across the state. 10 million was vetoed from the Alaska Seafood Marketing Program, which was a little bit of a shock to everybody because the fishing industry is in such a turmoil right now. That funding was directed to match with ATIA, the Alaska Travel Industry Association, and they were going to market our seafood. And anyway, that whole 10 million was vetoed. 5.2 million for Head Start. He vetoed half of that. 11.2 was vetoed from the internet for schools. 11.9 for compliance with federal maintenance of equity was also vetoed. And then the Alaska Reads Act was also 5.2 million. There was several vetoes through the Department of Health and Social Services that I'm not seeing any real impact here locally. I don't think there was 80,000 undesignated general funds there was a pilot program to deliver prescription opioids in locking pill cases, and that was vetoed. There was 10 million vetoed for some Alaska Marine Highway backstop funding. There was 250,000 for storage in Central Region. That was all vetoed as well for snow removal. But probably most important to you folks was the 20 million to replenish the Community Assistance Fund that all the communities get a portion of was vetoed. So there's hope and there's talk that maybe we'll find we can make some kind of allocation next year to put that fund back up to the 90 million, because if not, it will be at the 70 million. And the distribution would only be then 23 instead of the 30 million to be divided up among communities. So we'll all feel that. And then the disaster relief, 7.5 million UGF was vetoed from the disaster relief fund. In the capital budget, there was quite a few vetoes. We won't go through all of those. Like I said, I have a packet here for you. Anybody who's interested in looking at things outside of your area. I highlighted things that are in your area on these notes if you'd like to have them. But I think mostly, I feel like there was a lot of vetoes on the Kenai. So unfortunately, I think of particular interest to you folks, he vetoed the Soldotna Regional Sports Complex conference room expansion at 690,000. But he did leave the street maintenance winter sand cover for 300,000. He vetoed several things that probably don't impact the city of Soldotna necessarily, but do impact the borough overall. The waste transfer site for 500,000, the lift station phase 1 for 300,000, the senior center canopy roof for 50, the streetlight improvements for 400, the water sewer operating truck for 65, and there was a 3/4 ton also for 80. And then he vetoed the Nikiski Senior Center septic tank installation for 304. So I feel like the borough overall took a pretty big hit in the vetoes, but there were a lot of individually focused vetoes in his final enacted bill. So bills of interest, I think that would be of interest to this council. HB 50, which is the carbon capture and utilization sequestration. It was a top priority of the governor's. It addresses the sequestration, storage of carbon, depleted gas and oil reservoirs in the Cook Inlet, and it has drawn interest from all over the world. So it's the Department of Natural Resources is working on regulatory regulations for this particular bill, and we'll see how that all rolls out. HB 307, which you folks may have paid attention to, was the integrated transmission system where they rolled all the energy components or tried to roll them into one so that the wheeling charges and all those things that everybody was focused on for the utilities and for energy were rolled into that one bill for 307. And they also funded only partially though, and for short term. They only had to fund a portion of the rail belt funding that was given from the federal government to enhance, to modernize our rail belt from Homer to Fairbanks. Well, actually, it only goes Homer to right outside of Houston, I think, with this first phase funding. So the federal government had 206.5 million. The state has to match that funds to modernize the rail belt to the halfway point. And we are able to do it in partial payments. So they did a partial payment this year towards that 206.5. Senate Bill 22, which proclaims Juneteenth as a state holiday, probably will have a domino effect down to the municipality level. So based on the data for the state, with all 16 departments, it looks like the total cost is going to be about $4.2 million to implement that state holiday. Senate Bill 147, which was reemployment benefits, and it was one of the bills that had a bunch of other bills stuffed into that one. It establishes a stay-at-work program through the workers' comp regulations, and those will be forthcoming. It revamps the workers' compensation benefit guarantee fund so that it has its own separate funding, so that right now it gets swept into the general fund. And then when someone has an accident and their employer doesn't have workers' compensation, the fund has to regrow before they can actually make the payment. So they stabilized that funding so it wouldn't be swept. But one of the more concerning pieces of that bill, and we'll see how the regulations come out, was the presumption of compensability for workers' compensation claims related to post-traumatic stress disorder. And it primarily only addresses first responders, but that's a really hard determination to make when that post-traumatic stress disorder happened. And then how does the employer then and the insurance company manage that? So we'll see how those regulations come out. But like I said, it's primarily for first responders. And then when I talked a little bit about single subject rules, this was all a workers' comp bill, but somehow they put the Alaska senior benefits in this bill as well. So they did extending the program from June 30th to 2034. So it gave them quite a bit of time, but if you went to look for it in the bill, it would be in a really odd spot. Senate Bill 179 also was one of those catch-all bills that came along at the last minute. The bill prohibits cities and boroughs from collecting a sales tax on the transfer of real property, and further prohibits the state from levying or collecting a sales tax or use tax on transfer of real property. So that one I think is going to have to, people are going to really have to pay attention to what those regulations end up looking like and how it impacts your community. They inserted a last minute subsection to say a municipality may by ordinance exempt from taxation all or part of a mobile home park for up to 10 years after the mobile home park is constructed or renovated. So, and I'm not exactly sure why that became a really big topic or whose priority it was. They amended some types of property tax for farmlands and farm structures. And you heard a little bit about that from Senator Bjorkman, probably. That was one of his bills that got put into this bill. I was going to start my presentation today too by saying he stole my thunder a little bit today by his news split article today, because he went over all of these items already. Also, in that bill 179, the assessors there was an assessor component, and it requires now that the city assessors will need the level 3 certifications. It adds a requirement for meetings for the assessors and the resident or whoever makes the appeal. And then it has a few more components in there that I think municipalities and cities will have to watch a little bit closely when they put the regulations out. It used to say that there may be a governing body, and now it says shall, and it defines who that governing body should be for the equality board. So it's something to pay attention to for the city manager, I think, on that particular, as those regulations roll out, and watch to make public comments so they don't impact your community in a negative fashion. And then also HB 196 passed, which would allow for employers to use less intrusive methods and just use saliva drug tests instead of having to do some of the other forms. And it's less costly and as efficient, they say. So among some of the other major legislative topics, there was a lot of talk about the state's royalty on natural gas in the Cook Inlet. It passed the House, but it faced all kinds of obstacles in the Senate. It was HB 223, and it sought to decrease the royalty rate for new gas sold to regional utilities from 12% to 3%, and for oil from 12.5% to 6%. But it didn't make it through the Senate. So I imagine we'll be seeing something like that come up again next year. So over the course of the session, we monitored, I don't know how many bills, there was quite a few on your weekly report. You guys probably thought it was overkill, but we monitor all those bills to ensure that there's no impact. And I'll contact Jeanette and talk about whether we should support or oppose or remain neutral on some of those components, depending on the impact of the city. And AML does that too if it's a statewide issue, but if it's an issue that would don't impact primarily you guys, then Jeanette and I would work on that with this group, with the council. So that's kind of a wrap up of what happened during this legislative session. I'm sure you all know, you've all been around a while, that at the end of the 33rd legislation, any of the bills that were out there that didn't go anywhere or that are not transmitted then die. And next year they start over. So anything that is going to happen in this next legislative session for pre-filing or anything like that has to start at ground zero again, and has to have a champion legislator be introduced and start through the whole process. But one other thing I wanted to say besides just the legislative wrap up is it's a campaign year. And so I'm sure everybody's hearing about it. All 40 of the House members are up for election or re-election, and 10 of the Senate seats are up for election. So we could end up with another year, and this is no disregard to anyone, but another year where our start is slow. When we have a lot of new legislators come in, the legislative process is delayed a little bit as they try to organize and get up to speed. So just keep that in mind as we start watching. Usually when we have all the elections end, there's a lot more pre-file bills coming out because people are ready to get to work, and then they fizzle out towards the end. So don't be surprised if you see big lists of pre-file bills. A couple of notes about the campaign season or legislators not seeking office. Senator Bishop won't be seeking office this year. He's from the Fairbanks area. You likely will see maybe some kind of gubernatorial announcement from him over the next year, maybe. Representative Ortiz from Ketchikan will not be seeking re-election. Representative Laddie Shaw from Anchorage will not be seeking re-election. And Jeannie Armstrong, also Anchorage, will not be seeking re-election. So those seats are up for someone new. So we will have some new legislators. Running unopposed, Jesse Keel, Senator from Juneau, Senator Olson from the Arctic region, Representative Himshoot from Sitka, Representative Story from Juneau, and Representative Hannon from Juneau. So all of Juneau's folks are running unopposed. Representative Fields from Anchorage, Representative Sadler from Eagle River, Representative Delana Johnson from the Valley, Matsu, and Representative Tilt also from the Valley will be running unopposed. So we will have some seasoned legislators in there, but I think we'll have some new faces in there too. So it'll take a little while to get things running. There's a couple of races that are worth watching, and I'm happy to talk with any of you about it in a side conversation. There are a couple down here on the Kenai, I think, that you guys will be hearing a lot about. So we could have a little bit of a new look as the 34th legislature rolls out, which will roll out on January 21st, 2025. And
Any
that is my presentation.
Any council questions, comments? Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. Thank you, Ms. Bloomer, for the report. Did I hear you correctly say that Speaker Tilton has not transmitted the 5 pieces of legislation to the governor's office at this time?
Yes, yes. As of last time I looked at bases, they have not been transmitted at this point.
Is there a time frame that legislation has to get transmitted to the governor's office by after a session adjourns?
if you asked me how long the governor has to sign it, I can answer you right off the top of my head. But that question that you just asked, I'm gonna have to look into. Because
Yeah.
I don't think there is, but I don't want to say for sure. So let me check.
Yeah, the other interesting would be I don't recall where, when a legislative body has passed legislation, that the speaker or the Senate president has held on to it and not transmitted it. So that'd be interesting to find out if this has ever occurred in the past as well.
Vice Mayor, I think you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, but I think only once or twice before have they passed bills after the constitutional deadline also. And I believe I believe there might have been one of them could have been contested in the past, quite a while ago. So I will get the answer for you for that one question, though. I don't know that they do have to transmit it. So I'll let you know, though.
Anything else? Thank you very much for the
Thank you.
information, and thank you for all the work you do for us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And enjoy the nice weather. And Mr. Nelson, I forgot to look to see if you had any questions.
No questions from me. Thanks, Mayor.
Next item on the agenda is number 5, public comments and presentations. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you'd like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Step forward, Mr. Casheye, and please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, Mayor Whitney, Vice Mayor Parker, council members, City Manager, Ms. Bauer. Joseph Casheye, K-A-S-H-I, address 205 East Beluga Avenue, Soldotna, 99669. And yes, I am now a registered city voter. First, I have some sad news, which is that Professor Choi, who did the sculpture, was found dead at his home 9 days ago on July 1. He had already completed the design work on this. We were just in the process of fabrication and a little bit of mechanical engineering of the mount. A lot of us are really shocked about that, very much so. We're moving forward though, and we're hoping that we will have the full-size 16-foot by 4-foot high final sculpture done by the end of August, approximately. There was a lot of time involved in the engineering to get it right. I'm holding a 4-foot sculpture. That's the 4-foot prototype. As you can see, I'm holding it with one finger. It's actually, the way it was designed is actually quite strong with these ribs and the solid ribs. And actually, a lot of the design was done by Mike Reberg, who's a structural engineer, who actually is one of the guys that designed the wings for the Boeing 747. So we're pretty comfortable that this bit of aluminum will hold together. To further this along, this is being done with a water jet cut by Trijet up in Palmer. It took some time to find them, but they do an excellent job with an affordable price and very good customer service. So that even though our initial concern was that our initial budget was below what we needed, we're actually going to have maybe a small surplus on this. The way it's going to be done, first of all, I've passed along to Brian Irwin, who is the Soldotna Rotary Club incoming president. He has frames and things. And Mr. Irwin's suggesting that the sculpture be done, that the sculpture and its placement in the park at the Rain Garden be deemed as a memorial for Professor Choi, who worked really hard to bring a lot of art and public art and culture to the city of Soldotna. And so, that's our thought and our hope at this particular time. We anticipate that in the interest of simplification and durability, instead of a free swinging sculpture and a bearing, we anticipate mounting it on the pylon such that it will be manually turned to face upriver with the bright blue on top and the silver in the bottom of the spawning salmon, that it be turned manually early May when the first fish go up the river to Point Up River, and then it be turned the other way about the end of October when the last fish have spawned out and are floating down the river. So rather than having the attendant free-floating variant, which should be expensive, somewhat difficult to engineer, and probably have less durability and appropriateness, the current plan at this point is to go and have it on a manually operated turntable, basically. We think they'll be a lot less expensive, a lot more durable, and will advance our ability to move this forward by a considerable amount. That's the primary thought. We anticipate that we're going to look at having helical coil pilings, which I'm told are inexpensive and will be very suitable for this, with one main piling and one main support for the fish, which will be on the turntable, and then two support pilings to form kind of a triangle at the base, along with the piling above that point. We would hope that the city engineer could be in touch with us soon so that we can begin engineering the pilings and where it will go in. We're probably not severely compromised in terms of money, but we will need to go and raise money somehow or get donations to get the pilings and the support post in and this attached. Our anticipation as well is that this 4-foot scale model will be provided to the city of Soldotna to use with, after it's all welded up finally, and it's, powder coated and all, to be used, for example, as a signpost or something hanging on a post at the entrance to the park, or over the mayor's head as a sword of Damocles. But anyway, so we anticipate that this, prototype will also be used by the city in some public manner. I apologize for going over time. I've spoken as quickly as I could. Are there questions?
Any questions or comments from the council? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you very
for
much.
all the work, and, please keep the city manager updated and,
We will. I asked them to advance this a bit in the fabrication so I could bring it tonight before your next meeting.
thank you.
Thank you. And if we'll get some money for a piling and a foundation, that would be appreciated too.
Okay.
I don't. Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience wishing to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll take a look at Zoom, and I see no hands raised there. Moving on to the next agenda item is the set 6 Assembly and Legislative Report. Are there any representatives from the borough or the state in attendance who would like to speak? And I see none here in the audience, nor do I see any on the Zoom. We'll move on to next item is public hearings. Testimony limited to 3 minutes per speaker. First one up will be 7A, Ordinance 2024-024, approving the fiscal year 2025 capital budget and increasing estimated revenues and appropriations by $575,000 in the general fund and $575,000 in the small capital project fund, introduced by the city manager. May I have a motion to enact? Thank you, Ms. Hutchings.
I enact ordinance 2024-024.
May I have a second? Thank you, Vice Mayor Parker. Report from the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This ordinance comes before you as the funding mechanism for the resolution that you previously passed, Resolution 2024-018, approving the capital projects for the from the general fund. As a reminder, any capital projects that will come from a utility fund will be a special appropriation that is brought to you at the time any funding may be needed. And those projects that are being funded through this ordinance are the Street Preventative Maintenance Project, $400,000, and it updates streets plan, rehab streets, asphalt seal coating, crack filling, and partial depth repair. Police Department exterior maintenance, which is $100,000. Clean, caulk, and paint exterior surfaces at police building, including doors, trim, soffit, and stucco. Soldotna Creek Park stage improvements, $40,000. Stage improvements including rain cover, speakers, lighting, controller, and light poles. and Memorial Park Improvements Phase 1 at 35,000, kiosks, maps, and comprehensive wayfinding signage at the cemetery for public navigation. And that is the total 575,000 that the ordinance appropriates funds for.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone here in the chambers wishing to speak on ordinance 2024-024? Seeing none, we'll take a look at Zoom, and there are no hands raised there. Having no one wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Seeing none, we'll call for the vote.
Nelson,
Yes.
Chilson,
Yes.
Wackler,
Yes.
Hutchings,
Yes.
Carrie,
Yes.
Parker.
Yes.
You have 6 yes votes.
Ordinance 2024-024 passes on a 6-0 vote. Moving on to the next item is ordinance 2024-025, amending Soldotna Municipal Code Title III, Chapter 12, Property Tax to establish a new Section 3.12.036 real property tax exemption for residential real property, introduced by council members Chilson and Carey. May I have a motion to enact? Mr. Chilson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would move to enact ordinance 2024-025.
May I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Carey. The report from council members Chilson and Carey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So as many of you are probably familiar, the Kenai Peninsula Borough currently offers a $50,000 tax exemption on values for assessed residential real property that is both owned and occupied. So essentially, these are homes that are being resided in. This ordinance would simply replicate that at a municipal level for residents of the city of Soldotna. It would be in effect January 1st, 2025, and presents a minimal cost to the city, or I should say opportunity cost and lost revenue, with a projected reduction in revenue of $15,000 annually, roughly. This originated as part of a deep dive into property tax exemption structures for both the city and the borough. Just kind of looking at how those were set up, and really learned a lot in that process. And personally, I would love to see the borough increase the residential property tax exemption limit up from 50,000, given how significantly we've seen prices of property increase in the last couple of years. Unfortunately, there's some really interesting things we learned about this as far as statutory limitations on how we can structure those exemptions, which I'd be happy to go into if any of you have any questions, but I'll just summarize it saying that the $50,000 limit is really what we are right now as far as our ability to simply enact this by matching what the borough currently offers. Also, as you all know, the city of Soldotna has a very low property tax rate with 0.5 mils, and I recognize that the savings that this presents is very small. So for any resident that would get the full $50,000 amount, for any resident that would qualify for the full $50,000 exemption amount, that translates to about $25 a year savings. So again, that's a fairly small amount, but I believe that the benefits of this ordinance are more than fiscal. Really, I believe it comes down to the principle of providing equity with what the borough provides. So giving our residents the same level of exemption at the municipal level that they receive at the borough. And secondly, I think more importantly, it really simplifies understanding of how home prices are assessed. So many of you have probably received your updated assessment letter from the borough, or tax bill, I should say. And it's really interesting. If you look at that as a city of Soldotna as a resident, it can be kind of confusing to read. So you have different mill structures for the borough versus the city. And they have the different columns of, okay, well, if you're looking at it at borough level, your home is assessed at this value. But if you look at it at the city level, it's assessed at a different value. This would unify that where our residents have one assessed value that their homes are evaluated at. So I think that in itself presents benefit to our city residents. Lastly, the one concern I did have with this would be administrative overhead that this could present to our staff. I recognize, given the amount of savings that this gives our residents, it's very small, and I would not advocate putting this ordinance forward if it presented workload for our staff, given the small amount of savings on this. But because we're simply replicating the exemption that the borough provides, there's zero overhead for our staff. Any resident that has the $50,000 exemption from the borough would automatically get this. So zero overhead for staff. So I think that is very reasonable. I really don't have anything else to cover on this, but I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Mr. Carey, would you like to add anything to that?
I think Mr. Chilson just did an excellent job. And I think anything that we can do to save money for the people that live in Soldotna, we should.
Thank you. Moving on, are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item, ordinance 2024-025? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you would like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Is there anyone here in the audience wishing to speak on ordinance 2024-025? Seeing none, I'll take a look at Zoom, and I see no hands raised there. Having no one wishing to speak, the item is back before the council. Are there any council comments? Seeing none, Vice Mayor Parker.
I was waiting. So I have a number of questions, if I can, Mayor Whitney, for the sponsors.
Go for it.
The first one is, are property owners going to be required to apply for the exemption?
No. Any resident that currently has the $50,000 exemption from the borough would automatically receive this. So no additional workload for our residents, no additional workload for city administration.
So all property owners automatically would get a $50,000 exemption?
If they filed for the $50,000 exemption with the borough.
Okay, so then my next question is, some of us receive exemptions from the city and the borough, and in our code, we allow exemptions for disabled veterans, widow or widowers. Is this a cumulative exemption? So is this an additional 50,000 exemption in addition to the other exemptions that I get?
I can't speak with certainty on that. I believe so. I would ask maybe city administration to clarify that, because my understanding is that the senior tax exemption at the borough level stacks with the residential exemption. So based on that logic, I would assume that this one would stack as well. But again, I'll ask city administration to clarify that.
That is my understanding as well. I do know that that is what occurs outside the borough right now, that it does stack. And so then it would also stack within the city is my understanding.
Okay. And then you say the administration of this will be through the city or the borough, since the borough is the one who sends out the tax
Correct. The
bills?
borough would do this. So
And is the borough going to charge us for this?
I don't believe so, but I could ask administration to clarify that. My understanding is that this is their legal obligation to administer those the assessment of those values. So we know how that goes with tax.
We won't have that debate.
To that discussion. Oh, go ahead,
Okay,
go ahead.
It is my understanding that it is their legal obligation. As you know, we are dealing with the collection of the lodging tax and their legal obligation and their interpretation by their attorney. So we are going through that process, but it is my understanding that this is also their legal obligation.
But we have no commitment from the borough that they would administer this on our behalf.
No, I think we have to have faith in the borough to do their job on this one. But if there is an issue that comes of it, we can always reassess this as a council and take action as needed.
Any other
Thank you.
questions? Mr. Carey?
I hope everyone will support it, and I hope they are. And I keep in mind that everyone in the city votes for the chief executive of the borough. I don't think it would be wise for them to make it difficult for the people. And all we're talking about, the numbers are going to be there. Machines will do the numbers. And again, they'll subtract $50,000 from, again, what is computed for the people of Soldotna. Again, to say there's overhead, you'd have to charge me for the heat for the computer.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Chilson?
One last one, Mr. Mayor. As Vice Mayor Parker had mentioned, there's a number of exemptions out there, both at a city and borough level. And going into this, I just want to speak to my stance on property tax exemptions. It's really interesting to see all the different ones that are out there, and especially when you put that in the context of housing accessibility issues that we're dealing with, not only at a city level, but just area wide. I really wish that we had the opportunity to have a larger residential property tax exemption that would ideally be based on needs, because, you know, you hear a lot of people talking about the importance of the senior tax exemption. There's a lot of people that genuinely need that at a senior level, but there are also many that don't. However, there's also young families that are really struggling to get housing and afford their mortgage payments when you factor in the taxes on top of that. And it's unfortunate that we have to operate under a statutory framework that really limits our ability to have meaningful tax relief for young families. But this is something that we can do. I recognize it as a small amount, but I think it's a meaningful action that we can take as a council. And again, to Vice Mayor Parker's point about the complexity of the multiple exemptions that exist out there, I wish that wasn't the case. I wish we could have one larger exemption that was just simply needs-based, but this is the framework that the state gives us, and it's what we have to work with. So I thank you all for your hopeful support with this.
Ms. Hutchings?
So we do not know if the borough is going to go along with this or what it's going to cost us to handle it through the borough? Is that what I'm hearing tonight? That has not been clarified? They have to collect our bed tax and they're not doing it. So I think that we need clarification from the borough before we do anything. So I would ask that we table this until we have that information.
Any other comments?
I have no opposition to tabling this to address those concerns if those are what we're hearing.
Would that be tabling or postponing?
I would propose postponing it to the next meeting, but
I have no problem with postponing.
Go ahead.
I mean,
Mr.
it doesn't seem like it would be difficult to administer. In fact, it should make the ease of administering this. It should be easier for their department to administer, being that it would be equitable with what they already have. I could see how there would be setting it up. There would be some administrative costs associated with initiating it. But yeah, I do agree that tabling it until we have a discussion with somebody in their department to just confirm that would.
Is there a motion to postpone?
Linda made it and I seconded it.
Yeah.
She moved it table and I concur with her.
So the motion is to postpone by Mrs. Hutchings and a second by Vice Mayor Parker. And that would be postponed to the next meeting, which is July 24th. Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none. Any objection to postponing? Seeing and hearing none, we'll postpone ordinance 2024-025 to the meeting of July 24th. Next item on the agenda is new business, number 8, and all the new business under that section was done by the consent agenda. Moving on to number 9, mayor and council reports. Keep it short tonight so everyone can get out there and enjoy the weather with the snow coming down. King of the River Food Bank and food donation and drive ends July 11th, which is tomorrow. So if anyone has food, funds or anything to contribute to this competition between the city of Soldotna and the city of Kenai, please get it done by the, I guess, close of business tomorrow, July 11th. And I think the event will take place on July 12th at Oilers Field, if I remember correctly. Next item, cycle 1 of the fiscal year 25 mini grant application period begins on July 15th. And public voting for the 2024 I Voted sticker design contest ends on July 21st. And there was quite a few applications, and all of them were good. So it's going to be a tough decision on those different categories and different age groups. Next item on the agenda is the July 3rd, 2024 Planning and Zoning Commission. Ms. Wackler.
Yes, I wasn't able to attend the meeting, but I did review it and watch it. Thank you guys for having it so accessible. The main focus was on the proposed rezoning of the Blazy Park subdivision, which is sort of at that 90-degree turn on Kobuk, from a single family, two-family to a multifamily, at least part of it. That would be rezoning an area about 9+ acres. There was a large number of public comment for Planning and Zoning Commission. There were 5 people that spoke in kind of opposition to it, just they had concerns. They're not necessarily directly in opposition to it, but there were some, Jeff Delivka is the petitioner, and spoke on behalf of the other owners in the area, about that there are a lot of rumors about what the plan is for that. But he basically stated we don't have a plan, especially until we know whether or not we can rezone it to multifamily. There's a lot of discussion about residents around it were concerned about mitigating things like disruption of moose, small animals, birds being disrupted, or noise increasing. Other concerns that I think we often hear when you're debating multifamily versus single family. Delivka did talk at length about the type of project that they would like to implement for the city of Soldotna. And in the end, discussion was made about possibly increasing our, having discussions, talking about increasing rules about sidewalks, gutters, curbs, because we currently don't have a standardized practice for that in developments right now for the city. But it ended up being a split decision with the commissioner splitting the tie. So it wasn't, they're not yet, they're going to bring to us in favor of it. And we will see that coming up, I think, the next meeting, July 24th. We'll see that ordinance come in front of us.
And that would be an ordinance, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. While I'm thinking of it, the next council meeting, we will also be hearing an appeal on a prior Planning and Zoning Commission ruling. So that will be an appeal process going on at the next regular council meeting. Next item, city manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one item that you've been following along, Build America, Buy America Act. And thank you to Diane, who provided an email with information about what's going on at the federal level. There are some waivers that are being reviewed to waive portions of the act, and a lot of them that have been waived are through the military. So that's really good that the military can continue to acquire what they need to operate. I did note that some waivers were still under review since 2022, so the waiver process is not quick. And I'll continue to, stay on top of this. As you know, it does affect our field house funding with the CDS for Congresswoman Patola, and we're also working through what do we need to comply. We're working through USDA to gain compliance and to do a waiver if we need to. But we're still in conversations with USDA. It's unfortunately slow, but it is the way it is at this time. And we probably will have to go through a waiver process, but I'll keep you posted on that and if any council action is needed as we move along in the process. And that's all I have for this evening, unless you have something else.
Any questions for the city manager? Seeing none, move on to public comments. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on any item not appearing on the agenda? For those participating through Zoom, please raise your hand if you'd like to comment. App users by pressing the raise your hand button, and phone participants by dialing *9 on your telephone. Anyone here in the chamber wishing to speak on any item? Seeing none, I'll look at Zoom and I see no hands raised there. Next item on the agenda is council comments, and I'm gonna ask for Mr. Nelson first, so I don't forget it by the time we're done.
Well, thank you, Mayor Whitney. I don't have any comments tonight. Apologies, I couldn't be with y'all in person, but I'll see you next meeting.
Thank you. Ms. Wackler.
It's too sunny. Let's go out there to the Wednesday market.
Ms. Hutchings.
No comment.
Mr. Carey.
Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for biting the bullet and accepting a position on the planning commission. I felt almost of taking off the consent agenda to say no, because I didn't want to inflict that on you, but instead I'll go the other way and just say thank you very much for the service you're going to provide.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Chilson.
I was actually just down at the Wednesday market before our meeting and I saw the new bike lock system that our Parks Department put together following last meeting. So they're still going to be pursuing new permanent bike rack structures. But for the interim, our department, as they always do, got very creative and were able to bring up basically bars that attach to all the wood pillars there and provide a very cost-effective and very quick way to provide additional ways to lock up bikes. And it just made me take a moment to appreciate how creative that department always is at solving things with limited resources and very quickly. So we have a fantastic team there. So.
Vice Mayor Parker.
Thank you, Mayor Whitney. July 1st, we had an open house where members of the community came in and met the police chief candidates that are under consideration for our next police chief. And the next day I had the opportunity to drive around and ride around with them as they went to all the city facilities and met with folks there. So we look forward to our next police chief and go out and enjoy the great weather.
Thank you. Next item, meeting announcements. July 11th, 2024, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting at 5:30 p.m. The July 15th Library Advisory Board meeting has been canceled. And July 24th, 2024, City Council meeting at 6 p.m. Having nothing further on our agenda, we are adjourned.